Is there a supernatural dimension? A world beyond the one we know? Is there life after death? Do angels exist? Can our dreams contain messages from heaven? Can we tap into ancient secrets of the supernatural? Are healing miracles real? Sid Roth has spent over 35 years researching the strange world of the supernatural. Join Sid for this edition of It's Supernatural.
Hello, Sid Roth here. Welcome to my world, where it's naturally supernatural. I just love the rarefied air of heaven. I mean, I'm addicted to the rarefied air of heaven. I want more and more, and I want you to have more and more. My guest has uncovered an amazing cover-up by our government, by the Smithsonian Institution, to hide the evidence that Darwinism is a phony. And he's going to expose it to you because it's about time this evidence is presented to our society. So, LA, who's your friend?
Well, Sid, this was a skull, a cast of a skull, which we got in Paracas, Peru. We saw literally hundreds of these down there.
But you know what's so amazing, and we'll get to that in a minute, but this skull is not completely human. You see, many years ago, God gave LA a mandate, and he told him to study as the days of Noah. Explain what that is and explain what you found out from your studies.
Well, Jesus tells us it'll be like the days of Noah when he returns. And of course, that points to the fallen angels coming down in Genesis 6, having sex with the women, and the offspring are the Nephilim. And I believe that this is a Nephilim skull.
Means the giants.
Well, that was one of the characteristics.
Ah, okay.
Later on, I think they became different characteristics.
Okay, now these Nephilim, and you know, I've always wondered, I don't know about you, when you've studied the Bible, you see God says, destroy all the people in Canaan, destroy all the people in Sodom and Gomorrah. Why would God not have mercy on any of these people? There's a good reason. Explain.
Well, the reason simply is this, that we're dealing with a demonic hybrid known as a Nephilim. I believe there were many different incursions, if you will. Genesis, you mentioned, of course, Sodom and Gomorrah. Later on, when they push into Israel, the land of Canaan, who were there? The Nephilim are there. And the mandate is always the same.
Now again, the Nephilim were the fallen angels had sex with human women and produced these giants and these hybrid, if you will.
Hybrid, sure.
Okay, and if God could not get rid of them, they take over the earth.
Well, not only that, they would pollute the genome of the Messiah. That's really is the end game, especially in Genesis 6 with the flood.
Okay, now you have found some amazing research in newspaper articles from the 1800s and 1900s about these Nephilim. Tell me about it.
Well, I believe that they're Nephilim. We know that 150 years ago, as settlers pushed westward, they found burial mounds. And at first, everyone thought these were Native Americans. Well, they would dig into these mounds and they would find 9, 10, 11 footers, sometimes with 6 fingers, double rows of teeth, copper ornaments. These were not, and red hair. These were not indigenous Native Americans. Then when you talk to a First Nation Native American, they'll tell you that, oh no, there was a race of giants that predated us. They were here when we arrived.
And I've never heard that. I always heard it was the Native Americans, but this is that even the Native American folklore and history tell me one of the things you heard about this from Native Americans.
Just one of the things, the Paiute tribe, for instance, there was a race of cannibal giants. They were very large, and the Paiute would fight against these giants. And at one point in time, they herded them into a cave, and they set the mouth of the cave on fire, and they wiped out that tribe of giants. Interestingly enough, that cave still exists today.
Tell me about the Smithsonian and the bones that they have found of what could be the Nephilim.
Sure. We discovered that case after case after case, 9, 10, 11 footers are found, and the Smithsonian shows up, and they confiscate the bones, and they put them in crates, and they're carried away, never to be seen again. And we have case after case after case.
But if I was the Smithsonian, that would be my major
Sure.
exhibit. What could possibly be the reason that it's been taken from public sight?
Well, the reason is actually very simple. The Smithsonian adheres to a Darwinian paradigm, a Darwinian worldview. They believe in Darwinism. Anything that comes up against that, anything that comes up against it must be put aside, dumbed down, just completely cleared off the table. And this, of course, goes against the Darwinian theory, because where did these people come from? It's not the Beringian land bridge, that when the Ice Age and they came across the Bering Strait, that blows that whole theory out of the water. These people came from something else. I believe that the tribes in North America and in South America are the remnants of the Nephilim tribes that Joshua and Caleb pushed out of the Promised Land when they conquered it about 3,500 years ago.
But wait a second. If they killed all the population, how could they migrate then to the United States?
They didn't kill all the population. It would stand to reason, as they begin to move in to the Promised Land, the giants see what's happening, that the Israelites, first of all, have the power of the Most High God, and they are annihilating all the tribes. So the Amorites, perhaps, and maybe the Perizzites over here, some of these guys go, we got to get out of here. Some flee northward, and we have a trail that we believe follows that. Some flee across the Atlantic Ocean. And the workings of Thor Heyerdahl, for instance, proved that you could sail just on the currents from Egypt and wind up in South America.
But you know what? There's even greater documentation than that. You're going to find out about an entire communication system way before the internet, about architecture that no one could have known back then. When we come back, we'll explain.
We'll be right back to It's Supernatural. We now return to It's Supernatural.
L.A., why do you say these skulls that you are finding out about, especially in Peru and the United States, are partially human?
Well, this skull here looks sort of human, except of course it's elongated. You can see the way the sides of the skull go up. A normal human skull consists of 4 plates. A frontal plate, and by the way, these are sutures here. A frontal plate, then you would see another suture that would go and split the parietal, which is the center plate, in 2 pieces. Mm-hmm. Well, and then of course the occipital, the rear plate. What you see here is a frontal plate, which has been greatly enlarged, and it's got this very strange ridge bone on top of it. And then, where there should be 2 parietal plates, there is only 1 parietal plate. We saw many, many, many skulls down there with these characteristics. We also believe that this is a female skull. The male skulls are about like this, much, much larger, much more robust.
Now, you did an amazing scientific study of different colors of hair. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
Well, the hair on many of these skulls are red. They're sort of a reddish auburn in color. That shouldn't be there.
Why?
According to the Darwinian theory, all these people should have black hair because they came across the Bering Strait 10, 12, 20,000 years ago, whatever. And so these had red hair. But we wanted to see if the hair was dyed. So we took some hair samples, and there's a machine called Raman spectroscopy. What this does is it shows the molecular structure of each of these hairs. So we took a control sample of normal human hair. We took the red hair from the mummy, and then we took a dyed human hair, mm-hmm. and then we took a hair from a man who had claimed to have been abducted by aliens and forced to have sex with a hybrid. So we have 4 hairs. The control sample went like this on a graph, okay? The human hair just went like this. The dyed sample went like this, right through the roof. But here's where it really gets interesting. And in my opinion, it links what happened in antiquity with what's going on today. The days of Noah, the presence of the fallen angels. The red hair and the hybrid hair tracked like this over the graph, the same way, all over the graph till the very end, then it slid off. Now remember, this hair that came off this skull was about 2,500 years old.
So what you're saying is it lines up with not being totally human.
Correct.
Lines up with the Nephilim.
Correct.
That the Bible talks about, where the fallen angels had sex with the women of men. Now, tell me about the research you're doing in Peru, and especially what you found under the Catholic Church.
Well, there's these, in this one particular place called Waitara, which is about 9,000 feet above sea level, literally in the middle of nowhere. There are these ancient megalithic ruins. And on top of these ruins is built a Catholic church.
Help me out. What's a megalithic ruin?
Megalithic ruin is ancient stonework, very large blocks of stone. And we see them all over the world. But what's fascinating about this, when you're in the church, it's a Catholic church, and there's icons and statues and all this. But at the base of the church, about to the 8-foot level, are these ancient stones, which are laid without mortar. And the joinery is so precise, you cannot fit a human hair between the stones. And they are polygonal shape. What I mean by that, many different sided shapes, not one stone is the same. You'd be hard pressed to achieve that type of masonry in today's world. You could do it, but at what expense? And the technology that was done thousands and thousands of years ago, it defies the imagination. Here's a people that really didn't have the wheel as far as we know, yet they're taking these 4-ton, 10-ton, 20-ton, and even greater blocks of stone, and when they join them, Sid, the sides are completely smooth.
How do you move 20-ton stones without a wheel? I'll get you thinking a little bit.
Absolutely. And I think there's a supernatural component to all of this. And this is where I factor in fallen angels. It's like we see all through Scripture the good angels and what they're able to do. The fallen angels have technology. They have powers. They have supernatural powers that defy what we do here, defy our physics, defy our natural laws. And I think the stones there were shaped, in my opinion, they are fallen angel, or what we call Nephilim architecture.
Now, you see a tie-in with these Nephilim in the last days and the mark of the beast. I want you to hear about this. We'll be right back.
We'll be right back to It's Supernatural.
We're here at Ollantaytambo, Timothy Alvarino, Eli Marsuli on the True Legends expedition and seminar. We're at the upper part of Ollantaytambo, and what we have here in these upper walls is some of the finest Cyclopean megalithic architecture on Earth. And to demonstrate that to you, some of the stones up here, some of these massive stones, are actually curved into the corners. They didn't just fit two stones together like we would do, or two blocks together. They actually took the stones and with absolute mind-blowing precision curved them with the same stone, curved it into the corner. You don't see this anywhere else in the world. These are, in my opinion, the most impressive Cyclopean walls in the world.
And I certainly concur. What we see here is the architecture, the symmetry, the finesse, I'm standing here absolutely in awe of it, and I've been here before. When we look at the curves, things like this that are just absolutely perfectly executed, and yet they're playful. What I mean by that is that they can do it. They're not sweating it. They're not going, well, let's try that again. They're making it work. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. When we touch this stuff, in my opinion, it's like touching the fingerprints of the supernatural. It's like looking at something that's perhaps 10, 12,000 years old.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. This is absolutely pre-flood masonry. This is the kind of architecture, this is the kind of skill that was on display in the world before the great cataclysm, the flood of Noah. It's very possible that these walls were in the process of being built, possibly even with the intention to withstand the flood. Who knows? We don't know. All we know is that these walls were being built, something happened, and the construction came to a halt. Later on, the Inca came. They found these walls, the constructions of the gods, and they began to rebuild them. And this is, as Eli said, this is right here is proof positive. This is evidence of a advanced civilization living in the antediluvian world. And these walls are not only built with incredible precision, these walls are built on a specific inclination and with such precision that they could withstand cataclysm. And that is the trademark of pre-flood Cyclopean architecture. It doesn't just look amazing, it withstands extreme cataclysms, floods, earthquakes, volcanoes. It stands thousands of years through all of these tumultuous events. And here it is, the evidence of the pre-flood advanced civilizations.
Amazing. Between 3,000 and 10,000 years ago, our civilization had electricity? How, LA, is this possible?
These stones in my chart that we just talked about, the stones at the base of a Catholic church, have piezoelectric properties. They're highly polished surfaces. They were carved from a quarry, in some cases granite, in other cases andesite. These are just stones. And they're able to, sort of like crystal radios in the 20s and the 30s, that's similar, what they can conduct electricity. What we believe is that there was an ancient grid system over this planet at one point, with points of connectivity. This grid system may have been used not only as a communication, but perhaps to control the weather, to bring rain in, all sorts of things.
How could they have all this sophistication? I mean, just sophistication without a wheel moving
the blocks.
These blocks. What explanation do you have?
Well, you have two. You have one, which is the extraterrestrial, that they came from Zeta Reticuli, which of course I don't believe in. The one I hold to, and hold to very, very fast and diligently, is we are looking at fallen angel technology. And we get some of this in the book of Enoch, which tells us that they came and showed the secrets of heaven to the men and women of earth.
All right, tell me about, in the United States, in Ohio, the Great Circle Mound. First, explain what it is.
The Circle Mound is a henge. It's a very large circle, over 1,250 feet in diameter.
The word henge means?
Henge means this. It's a circle, but it also has a waterway in the inside. And the construction of this is incredible because at least this particular henge dates about 3,000, 3,500 years ago, which again fits the timeline of a diaspora when Joshua and Caleb are moving into, with the Israelites, into the Promised Land, and the Nephilim tribes are scattering. They show up there about 3,000, 3,500 years ago in the Ohio Valley. They create this circle, this henge, with a body of water in the middle of it. In the center of it, excavations proved that there was an altar, and they found human remains on the altar. And that's huge.
Okay, tell me about the American Stonehenge connection with we hear about the Stonehenge in England, and then a third place. Explain.
Sure. The American Stonehenge is in New Hampshire.
Well, how come we haven't seen this? How come we haven't been told about this Stonehenge?
Well, things are coming to light. I believe because we're in the last days, that all this stuff which has been hidden is now coming to light for those of us who are interested.
Well, Daniel even says a sign of the last days.
Absolutely.
There'll be an information explosion.
Knowledge will increase.
We always think, well, that's the computer, but it's also other areas.
Absolutely. The typical henge, it's a circle, and like many of these henges, like Stonehenge, it charts astronomical events. What I mean by that, summer solstice, winter solstice, spring equinox, fall equinox. And the circle, when you stand in the center of the henge and you look out, there's a standing stone. And that standing stone, let's say, is 100 yards away. And so on a summer solstice, the longest day of the year, you watch the sunrise come up over that standing stone. Well, Kelsey Stone, a college student, was wondering, well, gee, I wonder if I extend the line from the center of my henge in New Hampshire out to the summer solstice standing stone to see where it goes. So he begins to extend this line. He extends it further. It's across the Atlantic. And to his utter amazement, it bisects dead center the center trilithon in Stonehenge, England. And you can't do that in antiquity. There's no way. You can't take a long enough string and go across the Atlantic Ocean. It has to be done from the air.
Audience, do you think thousands of years ago they had anything remotely close to this kind of technology? Doesn't this show there was a super intelligence and what the Bible talks about, the Nephilim?
And what's amazing, I talked to a surveyor. There's no way to do anything like that unless you're in the air. Who is the prince of the power of the air? It's Satan. And this, to me, once again, fallen angel technology, but it gets better. When you extend that line from New Hampshire and it intersects the Center Trelathon in Stonehenge, when you continue that line, you wind up in Beirut, Lebanon. And Beirut, Lebanon is the home of the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians are the descendants of the Canaanites. And the Canaanites were a Nephilim tribe.
My goodness. So then you can see where some of them came to America.
Absolutely.
And that's why they're finding these skulls and these bones. And some of these bones they're finding show that the people were how tall?
Well, there's 9-footers, 10-footers, and 11-footers, and even pushing the border up to 12 feet in some of these burial mounds. And again, going back to Smithsonian, we have report after report from newspapers telling about once a town would exhume the bones, and a doctor, a man of letters, would measure the articulated or the disarticulated skeleton. A disarticulated skeleton is when the bones are just laying all around. But a doctor, a man of letters 100 years ago, can read a tape measure. And yet when you talk to an archaeologist, they will tell you they didn't know how to measure, which is, in my opinion, a bunch of nonsense. So the Smithsonian would come in, they would confiscate the bones and crate them up, and you would never see them again. They were just gone.
What a cover-up.
Absolutely.
Now, how does this tie in based on all these years of research? And I might add, he heard from God to research the days of Noah, because of all the times in the Old Testament, Jesus said it will be like the days of Noah. Explain to me, with all this research, how it ties in with the mark of the beast.
Well, the mark of the beast has 4 characteristics. If anyone takes it or receives the mark on the hand of the forehead, you can't buy, sell, or trade without it. That's the one we all know. The second one is men and women will seek death in those days but not find it. Well, what days? The days of the mark, which coincides back to or points back to the days of Noah. That lifespan seems to be extended. The third one is you take the mark, grievous sores appear on the body.
Right.
The fourth one, which is the most telling in my opinion, anyone who takes the mark winds up in the lake of fire. There's no grace, no mercy. You're in the lake of fire. And the same judgment that we see with the Nephilim in Genesis 6, Sodom and Gomorrah, and what happens in the Levant or Israel, the promised land, when Joshua and Caleb come into the promised land, it's always the same mandate. If a Nephilim is there, the judgment is always the same. It's total annihilation. There's never a shred of grace and mercy.
That's my question. Why would someone in their right mind that knows what the Bible says even consider taking the mark of the beast?
Because what is coming, this coming great deception, hinges on Darwinism. Darwinism tells us that there is no God, that we just evolved over billions of years. When Ben Stein sits down with Richard Dawkins, one of the premier evolutionists of the 20th and 21st centuries, and says, where did life come from? Dawkins says, well, maybe millions of years ago in another galaxy, a race of highly evolved aliens created us and then seeded us here through the galaxy. That's what he believes. I call that the alien gospel. This is what's coming, and it dovetails into Darwinism. Scientists and the masses, when they show up, the coming great deception, and they will show up. They will have 2 things for us. Free energy, which pilots the crafts. And the second thing is they'll have this DNA upgrade. And if a person takes this DNA upgrade, his DNA will become altered. Yes, he will have no diseases for 500 years or more. Yes, he or she will live and all this. But the problem is you are no longer human. You become Nephilim, and that's why the judgment in the book of Revelation is exactly the same as Genesis 6. There's a correlation between the 2.
Now tell me about that recent press conference of the UFOs.
That was in Washington, D.C. Senators, congressmen, governors, Air Force pilots, people with top secret clearances all came on the record basically stating that the UFO phenomena is real, it's burgeoning, it's not going to go away. It's increasing in numbers. This is the coming great deception. What event can change everyone's worldview in a second? You see a mile-wide craft over your city, unless you know what you're looking at, you will be deceived. And Jesus warns us that even the elect would be deceived if that were possible.
Well, you know, we started out talking about the days of Noah. Well, Jesus says it'll be like the days of Noah, and he will come at an hour you do not expect. So the issue is not what we've been talking about. The issue is, are you ready? That's the issue. You can only get ready with God's supernatural change of DNA, and that is make Jesus your Messiah and Lord. Ask Him to forgive you of your sins because He died for them, and ask Him to live inside of you. It's not complex, and I tell you, your DNA will be changed to be the way God created you to be. If you like the way things are right now, then don't change. But if you believe there's something better, make Jesus your Messiah and Lord. Do you agree?
Amen.
Steve, in your book, True Legends, you talk about a Smithsonian cover-up whenever giant bones are involved. So I want to ask you the question that everybody always asks. Where are all the giant bones?
It's interesting, Tim, because of the bias of the Smithsonian and their contempt for out-of-place artifacts. Every time giants were found, it didn't matter if it was on the West Coast, the Arctic, the Antarctic, believe it or not, the East Coast, the Ohio River mounds, they always have a fabulous cutoff point, meaning once the Smithsonian is notified and those bones are sent to the Smithsonian, they're never heard from again. And there's denials. A good example of that, it was a famous Kincaid expedition to the Grand Canyon, where they found the Egyptian citadel. Even the Phoenix Gazette carried that story. So, Tim, the cover-up has always been to keep this biblically relevant topic out of the minds of the people, so at an appropriate time in the future, they can claim whatever they want to claim, and they'll claim anything and everything apart from the true biblical origin of giants.
So, Steve, even during World War II, there were reports of giants and cannibalism coming out of the Solomon Islands. What was that all about?
After World War II, people couldn't reconcile the fact that a lot of servicemen, U.S. servicemen, had been eaten, cannibalized, as well as Japanese. And the fascinating investigation I've come up with was the fact that the Solomon Islands are riddled with stories of cannibalistic giants and even living giants to this day. I was contacted by a man named Marius who was literally going to meet me in California with, let's just say this, irrefutable evidence. But he said to me on the phone, he said, Steve, I'm being followed, and I'm not sure I'll even make it there alive. What has to be asked, the question that needs to be asked and has to be asked, is that why do people who have the evidence, why are they intimidated? Why are they threatened? Why are they disappeared? What is this cover-up? And I'll tell you the bottom line, they do not want people to understand that the sons of God, the fallen angels, saw that the daughters of earth were fair, mated with them, and produced a literally new race of hybrid beings that the Bible calls the Rephaim. And the Rephaim are with us today. They're genetic trace, they're genetic markers. And when we get into super soldiers, Tim, the super soldiers, the most important expenditures made are to identify not only the bloodline, but the genetic traits. There are people literally not only wanting to bring the giants back, but to insert giant genes in our soldiers to give them the super soldier ability. More money is being spent to identify genetic traces and markers, the actual gene prints of giants, both dead and extractable DNA from their teeth, from whatever cells in the mummies, to literally living giants today.
So in other words, what you're saying is somebody's trying to weaponize giant genes.
Absolutely. And the Super Soldier program is probably one of the most almost unbelievable, yet so believable programs that the U.S. military is involved in. And all the underground labs, all the secret places around the planet, everybody's after the same thing. They want comic book heroes that we would only laugh about and have laughed about maybe for 50 years, and now it's no longer fantasy, it's fact.
And we're not just talking about superhuman strength, are we? We're also talking about superhuman cerebral capabilities that the giants had.
Absolutely. Speaking of cerebral capabilities, the giants, even when they're in a stasis state, that means in suspended animation, whether it's Dr. Ernest Muldashev in Russia, in the mountains of Tibet, whether it's a whole underground base in which some of these entities, these living giants, are present, they have so much cerebral energy that they actually have what's called the red line. And you can't go past that. Or literally, they claim, according to special operations, 4-star generals, that literally it causes a person to almost come apart at the seams. It not only drives people mad, but it literally just causes them to go to pieces. You understand that's the ultimate weapon. You know, Michael Crichton with Jurassic Park brought us dinosaurs, and now we're hearing about woolly mammoths being cloned, and we're hearing all these news stories that Neanderthal is no longer a member of our family tree, which I've said for 30 years. But the point being is that it's all about weapons. And as a general said to me in special operations, it doesn't matter if it's ancient technology, doesn't matter if it's ancient genetics, those of us are either fighting to keep it out of the hands of the wrong people, or the wrong people are fighting us to kill us to get it into their hands. There's a war going on, and it's no longer just dusty old bones in a museum stuck away.
So, Steve, according to Genesis 6, fallen angels had sexual relations with human women, creating these hybrid half-angel, half-human giants. In a weaponized, military weaponized sense, what other capabilities might these super soldiers have if they have the genes of giants?
Well, beyond the obvious of strength, beyond the obvious of almost supervision, super hearing, one of the most remarkable things from my 4-star general friend was basically said they hunt by DNA. Every person's DNA has a specific harmonic that they could identify a specific target's DNA and assign a Fido, the 19-foot giant, to go after. And it was interesting because when you think about it, even going back to Jack the Giant Killer and Jack Be Nimble, Jack Be Quick, as I've been researching all these, remember the statement? Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. You go to the Bible, and whose blood cried out? Righteous Abel blood cried out to the living God after Cain slew him. So the harmonics of blood is fascinating. That's why the cry of the innocent blood is such a big deal in God's eyes, and it truly is, because the blood has a signal, a frequency, and there have been studies to prove that. So they want the giants to be able to basically target specific DNA characteristics. Not to mention the bottom line, and you know how much I love to say that, these entities want every last human being destroyed, and in its place a hybrid. They're going to try and prove that God's a liar. Jesus himself said if the days weren't shortened, there'd be no flesh left alive, yet for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened.
You've turned down opportunities to work with some of the major networks on documentaries concerning giants. Why have you decided not to work with them? And furthermore, why have you decided to start your own production company, Gen 6 Productions?
Tim, it's just simply this. I believe the big lie that's going to be hoisted upon the world is that the aliens created mankind, which I categorically reject. It's funny, the people that will accept the fact that the Anunnaki, star creatures, came to this planet will avoid fallen angels like a plague. I wanted the correct, in my opinion, after 40 years of research, I wanted the correct historic and biblical presentation of the giants. And quite candidly, when I talk to some of them, if I start talking about fallen angels having sex with earth women, they snicker. Well, that snicker tells me they've already made up their mind. And I said, I will only appear on camera if I can have final edit of what I say. Guess what? Nobody wanted to do that. That tells me there's agenda. So I believe this is a time that you and I are going to basically go out and say to the world, okay, here's what those guys are saying, but here's not only what the Bible says, and here's how accurate the Bible is with the history that follows. Gen 6 Productions is totally different than everything else that's on the TV, everything else that's on the documentary. Everybody's looking in a rear-view mirror at history, just trying to find the bones and find the original documents of all of the different finds, and I've spent 20 years doing that already. But we're taking people, Tim, simply where no one else has ever gone before. They're starting from the premise that all the giants are gone. We're starting from the premise that there are modern-day giants now who aren't suffering from acromegaly or some pituitary disorder, but they're literally going to fulfill the biblical statement of Matthew 24, where Jesus said, just as in the days of Noah, so would it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. Most people do not understand the evil. Most people can't even embrace the fact that this isn't about old bones. This is about a contemporary threat beyond any science fiction twisting of the facts. And that's why we're going to, I believe the best antidote, that's why we're going to do this thing, Gen 6 Productions. We're going to present information. We're going to present eyewitness testimony. Again, we're not just dealing with bones. Obviously, we'll follow the leads of bones, but we're going to show the people out there what the truth is and why this cover-up has been a multi-thousand-year cover-up, and what the expectation that everyone is going to, not only the expectation, but what is going to be presented to the people as the gods who made us. And I got to share this. When I did write the book True Legends, Genesis 6 Giants, Aliens and Fallen Angels, Angel Wars, everything I've written is to this point where Jesus said, if the days weren't shortened for the elect's sake, there'd be no flesh left alive. And the genetic tampering, the genetic destruction, the designs of the Luciferian globalists to destroy every human being on the planet, to insert their new creation, that we'll call him the Uberman, Nietzsche's statement, the Superman. What it's going to be is a super slaughter. And by giving people the correct information, by literally telling them what the end of the book is, how this plays out in history, my goal is to take away all fear and show them that the truth will make them free as long as they abide in the word of the Lord and the word of the Lord abides in them. Too many people are making too many excuses for the living God, and I'm looking for that time when the people of God will stand up, when the people of God will not take a back seat to the skeptic, whose the only agenda he has is what he's being paid to say. We're going to produce, I would say, such a different documentary form and style that I think people will be really excited, and especially to get involved with the Senate.
In other words, rather than looking for the giants that were, we're looking for the giants that are.
Absolutely. And I find it fascinating. Just as we're literally in the time of the movie of Noah, which was just a disaster biblically, it wasn't even anywhere near the scripture, but the times of Noah, isn't it interesting? The times of Noah, and now we got all this interest in giants. Hello, I don't think God could give a bigger neon sign than if he wrote it in the sky. And I'm not taking liberty, but even as everything is lining up, we are in the days of Noah. In the Noah days, there were giants in the land. And now we're having Hollywood just come out with movie after movie after movie, trying to denigrate biblical Moses, it doesn't matter if it's Noah, trying to distort true history so they can insert their own history. For instance, in the movie Noah, this is pretty fascinating. Most people don't know this. The fallen angels are the good guys, and Noah's the bad guy.
They're called the Watchers, aren't they?
Yes, they are. They're called the Watchers. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think what we're going to do is be able to give you a compressed, truly a compressed understanding of history that when I say mind-blowing, it'll also be heart-freeing. It will help you to understand the headlines, the movies, and the ultimate plan and scheme for your destruction. But the good news is, Jesus said he'd never leave us nor forsake us. And I believe that, Tim, we're at that time in history now. We're in the days of Noah, and everything that preceded Noah building the ark and the judgment of Almighty God on this earth that was in rebellion is about to be relived.
and even beings coming out of the spirals and or going into the spirals. Now, it doesn't take too much of a leap to say, hey, maybe they saw something like we're seeing today, and even beings coming out of the spirals and or going into the spirals. Now, it doesn't take too much of a leap to say, hey, maybe they saw something like we're seeing today. Could these ancient people have seen spirals and phenomenon in the sky, much like we've been seeing lately? And then they carved it into a rock for future generations to see and understand?
In the oral tradition of many tribes, I've yet to come across a tribal member from a tribe that does not have stories of giants roaming the land. And the way, as my father told me, and as it was told to him by his father, my grandfather, and passed down, the star people came from the Seven Sisters. The Seven Sisters being what we call the constellation of the Pleiades. The Seven Sisters and also the Warrior's Belt, which we know today as Orion. So from the belt of Orion, from that belt and from the Seven Sisters is where these star people came from. And the star people would come, they made themselves out to be gods because they had power, they had big medicine, like our people say. They were able to do great feats that the people were just astonished by. And so they took them to be gods because that's what they presented themselves to be. In that manner is how they then went and took the women from the different tribes. And from there is where the giant tribes were birthed from. The women did not survive the births of these giant beings. But as these giants continue to procreate and continue to spread across the land, there's many stories of the people and the tribes fighting against them. Sometimes, with good results, sometimes with bad results. Until eventually there was a culmination of the flood that came and destroyed the giants off the land. We still have some stories of giants after the flood. Ishtipapa, which was a giant that lived in Georgia among the Muskogee Creek. Ishtipapa means man-eaters, because these giant beings would just come and take a regular-sized human being and just pick them up and just bite their head off and just drink the blood, like popping the cap on a bottle, boom, 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 boom. So they received the name Ishtipapa, man-eater. The origin of them is not something that I know of that our oral tradition goes into. Like who created them? How did they begin? We don't have that. All we know is where they came from, and what constellations they came from to our people. And the giant races, they varied in height. They were the ones who built a lot of these ancient mound structures. We simply didn't have the technology to do it. Did regular-sized human beings have the time to do it? Yes. And there are copies of mounds that have been made. Just like there's the three pyramids in Egypt, two of those pyramids are copies of the oldest one. But they could not quite match the engineering, the architecture, the ley lines, they couldn't do it. So yes, there are mounds that native people have built, but they're a far cry from these gigantic mound structures that the giants built. It is good to mention that the stars, the constellations, the astronomy of the ley lines of the constellations, that's something that was taught to us by the star people. It was knowledge that was given to our ancient ancestors. And the belief was that there were certain times during certain seasons where there were portals that would open up into the spirit world. And markedly the equinoxes were the main times when this would take place. Edokmogi, Georgia, in Macon, Georgia, modern-day Macon, Georgia, there's the remains of an earth lodge that is perfectly aligned for the summer equinoxes and the spring equinoxes. And so it was believed that when the people would gather there during those times, that those portals would open, those doorways would open, and it would open the lines of communication and also for these spirit beings to come through, and whether it was teach, trade, or even take people with them, they would do that.
and even beings coming out of the spirals and or going into the spirals. Now, it doesn't take too much of a leap to say, hey, maybe they saw something like we're seeing today. Could these ancient people have seen spirals and phenomenon in the sky, much like we've been seeing lately? And then they carved it into a rock for future generations to see and understand?